All right, good deal. Welcome to the December 3rd, 2012 work session. Work sessions are a more informal setting to update the council on business items. No votes will be taken on work session items. Tonight we have 4 items on our agenda. Public comments allowed that is germane to an agenda item. If you wish to speak, you're required to fill out a public comment card and turn it in to the city clerk. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes with two minutes per person on each agenda item. Public comment will be heard at the beginning of each item. Once the item is called, no other cards will be accepted. Do we have any public comment cards?
We do not, sir.
Okay. Well, then if we can, if you wouldn't mind sounding the first agenda item.
First item is discussion of unified public safety communications. Mr. Chris Luckerblom.
All righty, let's get the presentation up here quickly. And we're going to talk through the this whole concept that we've talked about joint radio system for our public safety departments between all 5 cities. Got to have some dots, absolutely. I'm hoping that we can get as many of the questions answered that we can answer tonight for you, that we can frame the idea of where we're going, in hopes that you'll then consider an intergovernmental agreement at next Monday's meeting and potentially adopt it. So that's kind of the outcome, or starting with the end in mind, is that we'll have an intergovernmental agreement in place as of next week. So let me kind of walk you through what we've done with respect to this system. As you have been aware and been made aware, as I've updated you periodically, the cities have been working together, the 5 cities in North Fulton, for well over a couple of years now at this point, trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. You can see here just quickly that we have looked at a partnership with Fulton County. We've looked at how we're going to govern this thing, how we're going to capitalize, how we're going to procure it, all that good stuff. Let me move through these slides, and some of that will become apparent. The system that we're on is more than 20 years old. It was probably at end of life about 10 years ago, to give you some point of reference as to when it actually should have come out of service. 90% of the system is still running on original equipment. We do experience system failures from time to time. Typically, they're partial system failures, and they're failures that occur when the weather is warm or when the weather's hot, and we end up with some of the satellites that are in some of the fixed buildings down towards Sandy Springs will just shut down. I got to tell you, though, system failure when you're dealing with public safety communications is just not acceptable. If it happens once or if it happens 10 times, we need to have a system in place so that we are not continuing to buy parts off of eBay. A couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, if you remember, we talked during the budget process about this whole UASI initiative, or the Urban Area Security Initiative, and whether or not that was a viable replacement, meaning there was a system that to some degree was built in parallel to the system that exists, although it would need some expansion and some enhancement for it to accept daily users. And we simply tried to work with UASI. UASI worked with the cities of North Fulton for a period of time, and then they came to the point that they said, if we're going to do an agreement with the cities in Fulton County, we want to do an agreement with Fulton and let the cities then negotiate with Fulton for access to the system, and it just became cost-prohibitive to spend the same amount of money on a system that had Fulton at the helm versus a system that we could provide some local governance to. So we looked at Fulton as a potential partnership. I believe, and others would believe, that Fulton or that countywide communications is still the responsibility of the county. For as long as the county has a sheriff's office and has a marshal's office, they are responsible for countywide communication. So we're looking at an opportunity of how we could partner with them, where we build our own system and they build a system for the remainder of Fulton County, and we come to some type of an agreement of how we could roam onto each other's system. We'll talk more about that as we move into the presentation. So I'll touch on this last bullet. You'll remember that I probably have described to you at the county commission meeting where we were sent with a letter at one point asking us if we were in or if we were out with the county on a more countywide system. The last bullet is the letter of intent to partner. That was what we sent back, saying we were going to partner as North Fulton cities to design and create our own system, but that we did have the intent to partner with Fulton down the road so that we could roam onto their system and they could, vice versa, roam onto ours. This IGA is really intended to be kind of an interim fix to what we anticipate being an authority in the short term. Authorities are created by the General Assembly, though, and because we don't have one of those in session right now, we can't go or ask one of our legislators to create the legislation that would form that authority. So it has been a labor of love in trying to figure out how to make an intergovernmental agreement act the way we need it to act, be legal the way we need it to be legal, have funds the way we need it to have funds, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a couple minutes, without it actually being an authority. So we will push towards it being an authority sooner rather than later. We've got Representative Willard has indicated his desire to sponsor the legislation right after the first of the year in the legislative session, and rather than letting this just travel as typical bills do, we would like to impress upon our local representatives and senators, as well as the others of the North Fulton cities, how important this is to, collectively, how important it is to us as cities, and ask that they actually speed it up and get it done. And there seems to be support. Of course, we're not in session yet, but there seems to be support for the concept of doing that. Any questions? This intergovernmental agreement is going to speaks to a board of managers, which would likely be the same type of a board an authority would have. The board of managers in this intergovernmental agreement are the city managers or administrators of all 5 cities. Initially, Sandy Springs has kind of taken the lead with this. They would act as the Sandy Springs city manager would act as the initial chairperson. And frankly, we've got language that says when we would get future chair people, but I don't think this agreement is going to survive 120 days before we transition to an authority. So I don't know that there will ever be a need to trigger those things that would cause that initial chairperson to be somebody different. Wow, that's small numbers. But let's talk a little bit about how we're going to cost share this thing. Now I see everybody just honed in on the numbers and went right to what Milton's contribution is going to be. We had the discussion early on of how we could present to our elected officials a cost-sharing model that you all would support, because there are ways that we end up better, different models. There are ways that different cities end up better. If I were to be able to advocate for a position, I would say we want to share this model based on subscriber units, meaning we don't have that many radios compared to everybody else. So I'd love to break it apart on our percentage based upon subscriber units. My eyes aren't that good to tell you what that percentage would be, but you'd see that that's on there. Somebody else is going to say, though, that it's only because Milton has as much land area as they have that we even need that extra tower built. So, albeit you don't have all the subscriber units, your condition that you're bringing to the system is big enough that it's causing us to have to build an extra tower. So what we came up with, and I'll just cut right to the chase, is we came up with land area as well as subscriber units as well as population, weighted each of those equally, and then broke it up based upon a percentage of the total. Now, that what you'll see for Milton is somewhere in the neighborhood of 12.4%, I believe, of the total. Those numbers that you see in the bottom right-hand corner, before you freak out, I want you to look at those numbers and say those are based upon a model of a cost not to exceed $16 million. Now, we don't have a system design that is built out at $16 million at this point, but one of the thoughts amongst, particularly a couple of the city managers of the larger cities, is that they needed enough flexibility in here that they didn't have to go back to their council if we all of a sudden, on a $14 million project, if we were over by $250,000, split the way it was split, that we didn't have to go get 35 people to act again to be able to do that. The nice thing I point you to here is that even at that cost not to exceed number that I believe is bigger than the reality of what it will be once we get it built out, you can see we are still lower. We're still within our funding ability, and we're still within our funding ability that we programmed in last year's budget to be able to bring cash to this particular build out and not have to go finance. Any questions on that?
Well, that's just a capitalization cost. What are the operation and maintenance costs?
I've got a great slide for that in about 3 from now, and yes, we'll talk about what the operation costs are for when it's in warranty and then also when it's not. This is just the build out. Okay. The way we get to that up to $16 million in procurement is there's $12 million in contract equipment, $2.3 million in contract services, and then $1.7 million in non-contract services. You see that that's broken up below where you have the equipment itself, the steel and the microwave hops and the antennas and the stuff. And then you have the contract services, which is basically a project management of the system build-out, system design and build-out. And then the non-contract services, which would be more similarly situated to a public works type contract, where it's basically site prep, groundwork, tower building, that kind of thing. And there's different ways that we are going to have to procure each of these things. Many of, if not all of the items that are on the that first number, that first $12 million number that buys equipment, are on state contracts. So we can utilize state contract procurement for those items, which means the items are already bid on the front end. We can purchase without a lot of fanfare and hoopla. The things that we will be able to, or the things that we're required to go to bid on, will be obviously either an RFP or I'm almost leaning towards an RFQ for project management services. I almost believe that the qualifications are more important there than anything else, so that you get a good system build-up, good system design. And then obviously those things that would qualify as a public works contract are required by state law to be bid. So there'll be portions of this that are bid. There'll be portions of this that are bought off the state contract. Questions on that? The procurement will run through the Sandy Springs procurement policies since they're taking the lead on this. Alpharetta, their finance department, was the one that authored and is in the process of finalizing the RFQ, and then it'll go through Sandy Springs procurement. And we will basically pay off of an invoice as a part of being a signer to this intergovernmental agreement. Okay. We're in the middle of right now working on that RFQ for the bid for the project management. If we were to push go on this tomorrow and say, we had everything in place, we're on an 18-month build, just to give you some kind of an idea on a project of this magnitude. So we've got to weather another summer, maybe two, on the current system that we're on, and I've already told you that we're dealing with occasional system failures. We need to move forward with this. We've talked about it enough, I think, at this point. We have a direction. I think we need to move forward. This is a bunch of words to say that Sandy Springs is going to lead the procurement process. This Board of Managers will all have equal say in how this is done. Again, I believe that this will exist until the point of us having an authority. The procurement will likely happen by a municipality, whether that's Sandy Springs or us or Johns Creek or somebody. It'll happen by a municipality because we are exempt from sales tax, where the authority could actually acquire assets and they could make their own purchase, although they pay sales tax. And on a project of this size, paying sales tax equals about $800,000. That's money that's worth saving by acquiring as a municipality and either long-term leasing to an authority or transferring the assets actually from a municipality into the authority. On the front end, because we're running this through Sandy Springs' procurement process and they're taking the lead on that, Sandy Springs will, as product of the IGA, retain title on behalf of the cities until that title can be transferred to the authority. This, if you squint real hard, what this one's going to show you is that there are some incentives to moving forward before the end of the year. That's why you'll see simultaneously this item being discussed in 3 cities tonight. Alpharetta's already heard it, but it's being discussed in Johns Creek, Roswell, and Milton tonight. There are some incentives, and the incentives are real. They're almost $825,000 to do some of this, at least commit to acquire before the end of the calendar year. You might say, how in the world can that happen when we're paying a state contract price? And basically how that happens is we can pay a state contract price, and then Motorola or whoever we would buy from would issue a rebate, and that's the way that can occur. If you squint real hard there too, you'll see that I alluded to the fact that the $16 million was a big number, and I believe it was the biggest. It's bigger than the biggest number we've ever seen on system design and build out here. That bottom right-hand corner number, that's just north of $14 million, $14,228,000, I believe it is. That's probably closer in the ballpark of where we really think that this system is built out at this point. The interesting thing to look at, which is why we've gone down this road, is you might say, well, is it cheaper to just let Fulton buy it and us just move on to their system somehow, or beyond their system in the form of subscriber units? We've tried that. We've tried that several different times in discussions throughout this process. We always get back to the fact that we're spending the same amount of money at the end of the day, whether we help them capitalize their system and buy in as subscriber units, or whether we capitalize our own system and potentially have subscriber units buy into our system long term. At the end of the day, when you're spending 13 or 14 million, or you're spending 13 or 14 million, the desire would be to have local governance over the system. And we could spend 13 to 14 million dollars and not have a single bit of control, other than the fact that we pay a certain amount of money per radio to attach to a system, very similar to the structure we're in today. Or we can spend that money and have a local board of managers or a local authority manage it. And I think we've demonstrated time and time again that model seems to work well for us. These North Fulton cities seem to make very sound decisions collectively as a group. And that if we're going to invest the same amount of money, we might as well invest it with our own destiny in mind and with our own local control. Bill, you asked a great question about system maintenance, because you're right, this is capitalization costs. This will give you some idea, projections out through year 5. You'll see that there's maintenance and updates, and the possibility that we'll have to lease a space on somebody else's tower. You'll see there that in the 5-year projection, we've got numbers that get system maintenance upwards of about $1,023,000. You take that and multiply it by 12.7% would be our portion of it. The number's less than $170,000, and to some degree, that's to have firefighters that are fighting fires on a radio that actually works, to have police officers clearing buildings in a house with a radio that actually works, to having one of our citizens call 911 and need somebody, and we can't talk to them. We're really looking at relatively small dollars for that benefit when we all go together as a group, and that's why it's important that we've stayed together as a group this long. We've tried to fracture a couple times. I got to tell you, we've done our best at fighting with each other, but we come up to the finish line together as a group, ready to do the right thing for North Fulton. So that gives you an idea. Bill, do you have any questions beyond that? I mean, the numbers kind of are, the projections kind of are what they are. It certainly seems reasonable.
Bill? Is there any restriction on political boundaries? Could we extend the service into East Cobb or Forsyth?
The authority would
by doing that, picking up additional subscribers. I understand there'll be additional equipment required, but is there a benefit to do that, and would we be able to do it under this agreement?
I think that there would be no problem expanding the system. Collectively the cities would have to agree that they wanted to expand it. Now, it may be a different question that you didn't ask, but that maybe you're getting to, and I'll touch on it, is there revenue opportunities in this system? And in the fact that we're putting steel in the air in some places, are there revenue opportunities? And the answer to that is I think there are. We are going to require, as we build this system out, 6 additional towers across the 5-city area. Yes, there is an additional tower request needed in Milton, and it is up in the area of Station 43, which you probably guessed that would be where we would have dead area. The good thing is we were able to do away with the tower that we needed down here in the Highway 9 community, because we were able to co-locate this system. There's an opportunity to co-locate on a 400-footer over near the amphitheater. And it shows the propagation maps just phenomenal down here in the south part of the city. So we were able to eliminate a whole tower down here, but we are going to need one in the north part of Milton. Nowhere near as tall as 400 feet. Not even tall enough that it'll have to be lit according to the FAA guidelines. So shorter than anything that's up there. So I won't let you know about that. But there's different ways to do that. There's different ways to put towers up. You can either put towers up, and I haven't come to an answer here yet. You can either put a tower up and use the space that you need to use, and then you'll have available space that you could rent to somebody else. Conversely, there's tower companies all over the place that if you give them the piece of dirt to put the tower on in a ground lease, then they'll come in and build the tower and give you the space that you need for your equipment at no cost. And the way they make their money is then by renting out the other available space. Now, I don't know about you, but I kind of come from the belief in the background that we should be in the business of doing what we're good at, but we shouldn't necessarily start to do things we're not good at. And I don't know about you all, but I don't really have anybody on staff at this point that is an expert in renting vertical real estate. So we'll explore that. We'll explore that with the other cities. And there's going to be some revenue opportunities on a couple of different fronts with respect to this project. And we'll have to figure out, number one, how those revenues are received, and then number two, how are they equitably distributed. The position I have taken on revenues at this point, and it'll be decisions for the Board of Managers and for the authority long term, but the position I have consistently taken is that revenue should be distributed exactly in the same manner as which expenses are distributed. That if we're entitled to 12.4% of the expense to build it, we should be entitled to 12.4% of the revenues generated by the system. So, there might be opportunities for cost offset. I went kind of down a rabbit hole with you, Bill, but there's opportunity for cost offset, I think, that doesn't necessarily mean we have to expand in the short term. We just need to be smart in how we build.
Karen?
What are we paying right now on an annual basis to Fulton County for the system we have that works part-time?
Okay, two-part answer here, because what we are paying is an amount per subscriber unit for a system that doesn't work. The agreement we have with them says that we will pay on a subscriber unit basis for a system plus the necessary upgrades for it to work. Okay, so to this point, I'm going to give you a number. I just don't want to mislead you that next year they could come and say, well, we're going to now make our system work. Your number is now as big as us building a new one. It's been just shy of $200 per subscriber unit, about $174 and change, I believe. So we end up somewhere in the neighborhood of $22,000 a year, I think. I have so many numbers floating around in my head. I think that's close. But if they were to come and actually fix the system that we currently have, they just made a presentation on November the 15th. Angela Barrett did down at the Fulton County Commission meeting, which I watched. They've designed a system that will work in the entirety of Fulton County, and it's a $26 million system. So if we don't do this and they do that, our numbers are going to become this, whether we want them to or not, because they're going to build a $26 million system that says, now guys, you need to spend $1,000 a radio to be on. And I've seen those numbers, which is, we still end up with numbers less than that when you look at doing it ourselves. So, right now we're not paying nearly what this would be, but we're also not receiving nearly what this will be.
Right.
And we're not in danger of, if they decide to go that route, getting stuck with that before ours, if we go with this, gets in, they can't fix theirs fast enough.
Oh, no, they're,
You know what I'm saying?
they're more than a year behind where we
Okay.
are today. So if we stopped and did nothing today for the next year, they might catch up.
But if we ratify this Monday, then we're good, and we don't have to worry about them putting on a fast one and saying, oh, we're going to get ours fixed.
If we can stay collective as a group of cities ready to do this, we can get this done.
Bill?
Are we duplicating the same technology that Fulton County has or that we have right now?
We are not. And I've got, Brad was hoping he would get to talk while he's here. Chuck, come on up. We've got Brad and Chuck from Comdex here with us tonight. These are our experts that have helped us through the technology side of it. I can sit here and talk about board of managers and governance and capitalization all day long, but these are the guys that know the technicality stuff of what we have versus what we're suggesting to build.
I guess the other part of my question, too, is this on the forefront of current technology? Is there something coming down the road here in another year that we should be looking at?
So, Chuck Day with Comdex, and I'll try to answer. I'll answer that in a couple of points. So, the answer to your first question is it the same as what you Fulton County has today? No, it is not. So, the current Fulton County system is a legacy analog system. This was technology that was primarily designed and sold in the 80s, extended well into the 90s and on, but it still looks very much like something out of a 50 sci-fi movie if you ever actually saw the central controller. They work great. They work like a champ. But the problem is they shipped the last one out of the factory, I believe, in 2000. And they stopped supporting 7 years after shipment. So they've been out of support for 4 or 5 years, which to the point of buying parts off of eBay. It's not that it's not bad gear, it's just it's old and parts haven't been made in years and years and years. And there's only so long you can support equipment out of parts that you have. So the new system is an all-digital system. It is based on IP, Ethernet, very much like any of your other IT systems that you have today. So that kind of leads me into your second question of, is there something more coming down the road? The answer is always inevitably in technology is yes. But the way that these systems, and this is really applicable to any vendor systems, but the core of how these things work, any modern system today, whether that be a cellular infrastructure, radio infrastructure, they're designed using a lot more off-the-shelf components. You'll hear that term a lot, COTS, commercial off-the-shelf. And that's used a lot. That brings benefits of being able to do a lot more flexible things because you're doing more with software and you're able to incorporate features as software rather than ripping everything out and putting in more hardware. But the downside to that is that you have more frequent upgrade cycles. Okay, and that leads to that higher maintenance cost that you're seeing because what happens is Cisco and HP and Sun and Microsoft, they don't coordinate their upgrade schedules with radio systems. All right, and so they discontinue products, and as they discontinue products, those have to be replaced. So the flip side is you're churning equipment more rapidly, but what that does is it ensures that you always have relatively recent equipment, and that the big iron equipment of the base stations, those tend to last 20 to 30 years at a time before those are retired. For example, the most recent base station for Motorola, that'd be equivalent, that they have not discontinued yet, but they're announcing that they're coming to the end of life. The Quantar began shipping back in the early 90s, and they're just now getting around to announcing that, yeah, we're getting close to end of lifing it. So the base stations last a long time, and this base station, the GTR, started shipping about 5 years ago. So it's still pretty early on in its life, and it's got a good couple of decades left. So the answer to your question is yes, but if you stay to this schedule and you do actually pay the money to keep it up to date and current, it will last a lot longer than what it would otherwise. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So kind of to just bring us full circle here, our next steps are really to agree to this intergovernmental agreement that will be in front of you next week. I support the document. The city attorney supports the document. Ken was fairly instrumental in getting the language to something he could live with, and I'm glad that we were able to take a fairly lead role in getting the document to something that could pass muster in the cities. If that, in fact, is agreed upon by the cities, and if we move forward, and I'll tell you that if all of a sudden we have 1 or 2 cities that decide not to move forward, maybe one city that decides not to move forward, I'd be back in front of you real quick finding out whether or not we wanted to go without one. If we wanted to go as 4, I think the answer is still yes. The system to some degree is scalable based upon the geography of the city that may or may not want to go. But I'm going to keep the faith that all 5 are going to stay and move forward together. We would need to finalize the tower sites and get site agreements if it was land we didn't own. Now, that's not really of issue to us because we would find a way to use the land that we own for the site rather than having to go out and try to acquire land. We have a process, and there's some meetings later this week about how we secure the radio frequencies that we need. We then also work with Fulton to come up with some type of a partnership if there was one, and I don't know exactly what that looks like. I don't know if there's a cost that attaches to being able to roam over to our system. My gut tells me there probably would be some negotiated costs that Fulton would pay our authority to be able to roam to our system. And then we would start to procure the state contract items and issue the bids, and we'd do the project build-out. This presentation that you saw tonight is exactly the same presentation that will be seen in all 5 cities. So, it was one that I didn't build this, but we all kind of built it together so that we're trying our best to have all 5 elected bodies see the same thing, hear the same thing, and knowingly make decisions on the same thing. Because we're talking about a large expense, and we're talking about the first regionalized 700 megahertz system in the state, which we've done first before, so let's do it again. I think that these cities have the ability to come together and get it done, so to speak. So I'm happy to answer any questions. We'll have the benefit of the Comdex folks here tonight. If you have any technical questions, maybe they answered them for you. I look for your support as we move forward. This is very important to both the police and fire department here in the other 4 cities as well. Yes, sir.
Without getting into the weeds too much, because I don't understand all this stuff anyways. Once we bring up, given the fact that we're going to accept this and go forward with our own system up here, when this new system is activated, do we run concurrently for a period of time with the old system, or is it an automatic switchover? And how long is a shakedown period for the new system?
So the way that you would do this is, yes, you'd build your new network in parallel while your units continue to operate on the existing Fulton County system. The radios that you have today are capable of both the older analog and the new digital. So you would do that from an ease of transition process. And then a point would come when the new system is built out, has been tested, validated, vetted, yep, it's ready to go. You can then it can literally be as simple as a knob turn on the radio, and you're operating on the new system. Now, the implementation teams will come and touch the radios to add the new system into it, so that they have that ability to then, when the time comes, turn to that new knob position and the new system is in there. And then very likely, after they're done, there'll be some maintenance because you'll want to change that old system as Fulton County upgrades to their new one. So in the near term, you would leave the radios the same because you'd leave that system in it to allow them to switch to that old system if they had to, say, go downtown to Court or Grady, or for whatever reason, they would leave that in there. But it makes for a very simple transition to build the new system around the old. Should not be traumatic at all.
Obviously, then you've made these transitions with other systems.
Done with you. I did Cobb's, I did Forsyth's, I did Houston's. So I've done several of them in the area.
They've been flawless.
Well, it's a lot easier, particularly when you got a new system like Forsyth. I mean, now these are a number of years ago. But when we built that system out in 2005. That was it was a similar situation. Now, they were older analog VHF system, but it was the same situation where you had an old system that they could just run in parallel, and in that case, they just handed them a new radio. That was the transition because the radios couldn't do both. So anytime where you can build all new and not disrupt the existing, what you got, that's easy. When you start doing upgrades to existing systems, that's when it gets really messy, and there's no way to avoid all of your transition pain. So frankly, this is the simplest, easiest way to do it. Fulton will go through some pain when they go through the transition. They will. You can't avoid it. It's just a question of how much and how do you limit it. So by going this way, that's one side benefit, is you do save yourself a little bit of heartburn of that transition process.
One question, and Chris, this is more for you. While we have the current system in place, what's our liability as a city? Obviously, worst case scenario, if something were to go out and not work, someone made a call, couldn't get through. How does that work?
We've not to this point experienced a total system failure that wasn't able to be fixed in fairly short order. I mean, obviously, we would make the decisions we have to make to manage that on the ground level. And if that meant we went to more of a cellular technology in the short term, we might do that. I mean, we could potentially, with a little bit of notice, that the UASI system is still out there, and in the state of emergency, maybe we could transition over to it. We could work through some agreements we have and potentially revert to the north part of the city and for site system. I mean, we would sit down in a war room environment and say, we've got to meet the needs of this failed communication system. It might take on 10 different faces so that we get all different areas of the city covered. But we're still with a system that has from time to time blips on the radar, but we've not had, nor do we anticipate a total system failure that can't be recovered fairly quickly. But the reality is, you're absolutely right. I mean, there is that risk and there's that possibility, and that's why finally I was in a meeting and said, "Well, guys, we need to stop. We can talk about this for another 2 years if you want to, and if we can keep talking, and we can still have system failures. So at some point you got to stop talking and you got to start doing. And I think that's why we're trying to push forward to a pre-end of 2012." At least go, so that we know that we're moving in the right direction.
I just wanted to say I will not be here next Monday, but I do support going forward with this.
Great, thank you.
Lance?
Where is there is a heart, the heart of the system, where would it be sited and located?
East Roswell Park.
Where?
East Roswell Park.
Okay.
East Roswell Park. I learned something tonight.
All right, anything else?
Great job.
Everybody?
Thank you for your support. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Chris. Thank you guys for being here. Help out. You excuse, you have a note?
Yes, I'm an excuse early out.
You've got a note, you showed it to me. All right, the next item is discussion of amendments to the personnel handbook covering pay, benefits, and leave policies. Presented by Mr. Sam Tregler.
Hi. And make sure I can work this. We had some changes to our personnel policy handbook. A couple of things that are just going to go to document our current practices. Those three are supplemental pay and educational incentives, our tuition reimbursement policy, and employees who are currently being paid at the maximum of their pay range. We're also going to revise one of our current policies in order to get compliance with the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, which is the healthcare reform. And we're also going to revise policies to adjust our vacation accruals, which is a pretty significant change. And it'll probably take you a few minutes to get your mind around what we're going to propose, and I saved that for the end. But it's interesting, and I think it's sort of unique to local government, and it's something that we're looking forward to going ahead with if you approve it. The first issue is, or the first one that we have is employees who are, let me try to skip a page. No, I did. There's the first one. The first one I want to talk about is to document our current practice, which is to offer supplemental pay and educational incentives in our police and fire departments. Right now, when we hire an employee, a new hire, we go to calculate what their entry-level salary will be. They get $1,000 for receiving an associate or having an associate's degree, and another $1,000 for having a bachelor's degree. Maximum $2,000 that will be added onto their base pay when they're hired. Over time, we've extended that practice to our current employees to encourage them to continue with their education. And we've continued to pay them for receiving that bachelor's degree and adding that $1,000 onto their base pay when they receive that. It's happened a couple of times, once in fire, once in police in the last couple of years. And we really just wanted to document that practice to make it compliant with where our current employee or where our new hires are. Again, it's a $2,000 max for each employee. If they receive their bachelor's degrees, it's limited to police and fire. To encourage them to continue their education, I think that helps when they're at work and out on the road and having to deal with our citizens to have that bachelor's degree. I think it's something that's good that we can encourage. Yes, sir.
Do these degrees have to be in the field?
Not necessarily.
Public
It's
safety?
simply a bachelor's degree. Actually, I had the question today from one of our employees that if they were in the police department and received their degree in English, would that count for the bachelor's? And the answer is yeah. They went and put the time and effort into receiving the additional education and most degrees are somehow applicable to what police and fire do in some way, shape, or form. Even an English degree would work well in probably the police department with the amount of reports that they're required to write and that type of thing. So it says simply that for receiving your bachelor's degree, it would be an additional $1,000 in associate. And in this policy, completing 60 hours or 60 semester hours, which is about the equivalent of an associate's degree, would also equate to that.
So there's no limitations in the types of degrees then?
No, sir. There's not.
Okay. Lance?
Is it based on, does that have to be from an accredited institution?
It is, and that's how we've been enforcing it, and we try to avoid if someone just goes to non-accredited, and that will be written into the policy, yes.
Okay.
Yeah?
Go ahead. I'm okay.
Good? I'm sorry. Tuition reimbursement. This is actually a policy that was in our previous rendition of our personnel handbook, and it was in the benefits section, and it got pulled out because we sort of gutted that entire benefits section because employee benefits change year to year, and there was a lot of detail in benefits. And we thought it was best to sort of make it a little bit more generic in the process and say that it was referred to in our summary plan documents that our insurance broker provides every year. This has been in there. It's currently in our summary plan document for insurance, but we thought it was best to have that documented back in our rules and regs. And basically what it does is it provides reimbursement for up to $3,000 per year for any employee for tuition reimbursement, also associated book fees and anything else. But it's $3,000 per year, again, from an accredited college or university, and that they receive a grade for their coursework that they have. And again, this is just sort of putting the policy back into place of what it was.
One question on that.
Yeah.
I do have a question on that one. I know Georgia's a right to work state, but is there any kind of reciprocity as far as, length of service after they receive the grade as which
We have
provide
not
the
written that into
reimbursement?
the policy at this point. I have seen sample policies from other jurisdictions that require someone to work for a period of a year where they would require it to be reimbursed. We haven't included that. Again, this was sort of bring our old policy in, and it didn't have that in there.
Do those things generally work? Do you know? I mean,
It's tough to, it's kind of tough to get it back because we still have to pay the employee the last check if they have accrued vacation or something like that. They may be able to get it at that point. But it is in place and it's something that we could go after if that's an interest of having that written in there. There's a certain time period the employee has to stay following that. Again, we're paying this out, though, after they receive their degree, after they receive or complete the coursework.
Sure.
So they have to come out front with the money. They have to complete the coursework, receive a letter grade of a C or higher in order to get reimbursed.
okay.
There's one example that I'll just bring up where that's really clean, and that's in the police department. That if we send somebody to the basic law enforcement mandate class, and then they all of a sudden leave within 2 years, we can seek to recover those expenses. Now, the neat thing about the way that it's structured is it's written in state law that the hiring or employing agency is responsible for paying those back. So if we were to get somebody certified here who all of a sudden decides in 18 months that Kennesaw looks like a better option.
Sure.
Now, Kennesaw recognizes that they're going to make that hiring decision with a bigger check than they otherwise would have had if the person was with us for a full 2 years. I like the idea of incentivizing or requiring a certain length of performance after you invest in somebody. I should figure out how we can do that, how we can enforce it.
I just like the idea too. I'm just, not sure how it's done. If the rest of the council agrees with that as well, it's just.
We have that in my office.
I think we
It's
could
actually
require it by
2-year.
policy. Now, the enforcement of it might be on a case-by-case basis based on the circumstances that
Not-
exist
not
at
what
the
it
time of
is,
separation. But if you all, so now I'm back down here, I can't see anybody again. I stood up there.
I would, maybe something you guys look
You want
into.
us to look at that?
See what other policies are saying, and maybe at least we address it. Like you say, it may be, at least if we have it in the policy, it may be on a case-by-case basis if, someone's leaving, but negotiation, but.
Great.
I'm sorry, I keep getting ahead of myself. The next point that is sort of documenting one of our current practices is to deals with employees who are at the maximum of their pay range. The city last year, we completed a salary survey. We established pay range for all our employees. And we have employees, there are 3 of them this last year, whose pay was at the maximum of the pay range when we went to offer the market adjustment that we did this past October. The way we've handled it in the past, and we've handled it this way for the 3 years that I've been here, and there's always been just a couple of stragglers who fall into this category, we ended up providing a lump sum check on what that percentage would have been, or that they would have received at October 1 when everyone else gets their raises. The idea is to provide it as a lump sum so their annual salary doesn't keep going above and beyond the maximum of the pay range, and we consider to accrue that liability. So they're still getting their raise like all of our other employees, but it's limited, and it doesn't limit their base salary, or it does limit their base salary going forward until the pay ranges would extend, and then they can start getting their raises again, like everyone else.
But they get it on October 1st, so if they left during the year, if they left on November 1st, you've paid them for 11 months of
Yes,
that
ma'am.
increase.
Yes, ma'am. That's been our practice up to this point, and it's just been paid out as a lump sum. Typically, the people who are at the maximum of the pay range aren't those ones who are going to leave us after a month. Sometimes circumstances do occur, and they do. But
Could
we have
it be
been paying
paid
it.
quarterly rather than for a full year on October 1st?
It could be. Absolutely.
We paid monthly. I mean, you could break it up by, we could divide by 12 as easy as we could divide by 4, or as easy as we could divide by, we could divide by 26.
And just do it as a bonus
Paycheck.
to them rather than as a salary?
Why don't we do that? Why don't we prorate it based upon dividing it by 26?
Is that the only question I'd ask about that is, and certainly understand the point there, but the few people that has happened to in the past, would that be a big negative to them? Or I'm assuming these are high-level employees that...
For the most part, they just want their money somehow.
Okay.
And to get it is the key point.
It's not something where they're counting on, okay, this is our,
No,
what's
not at all,
your
because
I don't
actually,
think-
believe it or not, those people typically change year to year.
I don't think you would want to do it on a, divide it by 26 and do it that way, because then it could be construed as being really a salary increase. I think you would want to do a quarterly bonus or something like that, so it is not just,
So basically, you have 3-month liability rather than
right, exactly.
12-month if someone left it.
And I'll be real honest with you. We've got great, these are, the people that fall in this category are high-performing staff members that we have. There were people that transitioned from CH to a mill, and when we made the transition, we hired, there's a handful of people that we hired probably more at a private sector salary than a public sector salary who've now reached the top of a public sector bracket quicker. So that's how we've created this condition with, less than a handful of people.
Right.
So
I would just think if you just did it quarterly, then that you've limited your liability a little bit if somebody left during the year, but yet it's clearly not being paid as additional salary because it's not being paid every pay period.
we all agree with that? I can.
I'm okay with that.
Good with that?
Absolutely.
Is that right? Okay.
Good.
Last one is a change to comply with the Healthcare Reform Act. And it's simply changing what our current policy is, where we consider full-time employees at 35 hours per week, dropping it back to 30. This only applies to health insurance benefits. And to be perfectly honest, this is purely a compliance issue. We don't have any employees who fall in that range of 30 to 35 hours. Our part-time employees typically work 20. Full-time employees are on 40 or more per week. So this is simply a matter of complying. So we have it in writing that if we go to hire a part-time employee, we know sort of where that limit is and where we consider them full-time for this purpose.
So you guys are taking that in consideration and not letting something get by
Right.
on that, because that could be a big cost. All right?
This gets into the changes that we were looking to make for our vacation and sick leave policy. We really have 3 distinct groups of employees who work for the city. There's admin employees who work 2,080 hours a year, 40-hour weeks. Our police employees who are on shift work 2,184 hours per year. It's 42 hours a week. And fire employees work 53 hours a week, or 2,176. So there's all different kinds of hours that employees work during the course of the year. And each of those groups accrue vacation at a different rate. Earlier this year, we had a committee come in to study the issue of how those accruals are done and what the rates they're accruing at. And this is sort of the result of where that committee was and some of our supplemental management work that was done sort of after that committee formed and gave us some ideas on how to proceed. Sort of to give you an example, and my eyes aren't as good as Chris because that is awfully small. Right now, if you look at what our 5 to 9 year employees are, everyone has 21 days of vacation in years 5 through 9. But if you look at the number of hours, it all varies based on what group they fall in. It ranges from admin employees getting 168 hours per year, all the way to fire employees getting 504 hours per year. But again, it equates to the equivalent of 21 days. When you look at percentages, that shows that admin employees are off about 8% of the time, or can be off 8% of the time if they use all their vacation. Police can be off 12% of their time, and fire can be off 24% of their time. So what we really looked for was a way to address this disparity between those groups and to maintain sort of equity between them. And what we came up with, and this writing gets even smaller.
Baffle you with small numbers.
Is we looked at what admin employees do and what their percentages are over has amount of work for each sort of bracket that we have for vacation use. And we extended that down through police and fire so they'd all be getting the same percentage time off as admin employees do. So, for example, that police officer who was working or was getting 252 hours and 21 shifts would drop to the same 8.08%, or about 176 hours of time, and receive about 14.7 days off per year. So everyone would be on the same basis time-wise each year and getting their accruals. And we were trying to find a way to make it fair to everyone. And when we came up with those numbers, we wanted to make sure that it was fair in the marketplace as well. And we surveyed some data, or went out and found some data on what other jurisdictions are allowing their employees. And what you see here is an 11-year employee and what they're accruing and sort of the maximum level. If you look, the proposal for police down at the very bottom on where it says Milton proposed, police were looking at taking the 11-year employee to 202 hours and the fire employee to 252 hours. I'm sorry, and the police max would be 252. Except for Alpharetta and Rome at 11 years, we're still ahead of everyone else in the system that we looked at. And then at the maximum level, the 252 hours, we're actually ahead of everyone that we surveyed. There's no one who has a higher accrual total. And that includes Alpharetta, Rome, Forsyth County, Smyrna, Cobb County. If you look at fire, sort of a similar situation. At 11 years under our proposed plan, they received 254 hours of vacation time. And there are about 4 or 5 jurisdictions that are more than that, although we're in the ballpark there. When you jump to the max that they would accrue at 318 hours, again, there are only 2 jurisdictions that are accruing more, Smyrna and Hall County. So it looks like it's okay in the marketplace what our proposals were, so we've proceeded forward with it from there.
So could I interrupt just real quick and point something out to the council? You probably all have caught it on this last 2 slides, what sparked this whole discussion to even start, and that was once you start to accrue and allow caps as big as 700 hours, we can't find time to get those people off. We can't find, we have a minimum level of staffing that we're required to maintain so the public safety isn't at risk. And I'm all about being fair, although I can't say that fair was the first thing that drove some of these decisions. What drove some of these is we were having a management difficulty keeping the sufficient staffing in place here in Milton. We had plenty of staffing at home on vacation, and we could continue to allow these hours to accrue. And at some point, we would get to a point where we just couldn't even make the minimum number of staffing work. So it's kind of why we went through a quick little study and said we got to change something, because if we don't change something, then the future won't fix itself. So that's what this whole concept was. But that's the number, if you caught it on the last 2 slides, that drove this whole thing, is once you got numbers upwards of 700, that's not sustainable in the short term, let alone the long term. So yes, will attrition solve this problem? 20 years maybe. I wasn't ready for attrition to be the thing that solved this. We need to put a line in the sand, and we needed to start to solve it quicker. Sorry, Sam, go ahead.
That's fine. Thank you. And along those lines, we looked at how we're going to transition to this new plan. And the first part for our current employees is the transition to this is purely voluntary. Administrative employees will transition automatically because their accrual stayed the same. But police and fire will be able to choose whether they want to participate or not in this new revised plan. Employees have their choice. They may stay in the current. But as Chris mentioned, when we wanted to, I keep hitting that, I'm sorry. We wanted to draw sort of the line in the sand with our employees. So what we looked at was all employees hired after January 1st, 2013 would be required to be under this new plan in police and fire. So we sort of start to fix the problem by hoping that employees and offering incentives for employees to come into the new plan, plus taking all new employees as they come in, and with our turnover rate, bringing them into this plan and solving the problem over time that way. So what would incentivize our employees to transition into this plan? We looked at some of the things that would help incentivize it. We wanted to increase their annual carryover. Right now, employees carry over 240 hours and a little bit higher in police and fire. We wanted to make that so it was equivalent to a minimum still of 240, plus if they accrue more than that, they would carry over what their accrual rate was. So in some cases, those would increase. We wanted to increase the number of hours paid out at time of separation if an employee were to separate from the city. Right now, employees, regardless of what area they're in or what vacation schedule they're on, they receive 240 hours of vacation payout. I'm sorry, that is a slide. There it is. Right now, they receive 240 hours when they separate from the city. Under this plan, we would increase it to police would receive 252 hours at time of separation if they have the vacation accrual available. And fire would receive a maximum of 318, if they have those hours available. What that does is it makes the same dollar value across the board, similar to how we were equating everybody's vacation time. That would increase it so everyone's dollar value was the same at the time they separated. If we have a fire staff member who was making $40,000 a year, and they separated, and they were maxed out on their vacation, they receive the same amount as an admin employee who had the 240 hours in the bank. So we're making everyone equal at time of separation as well. Sick leave changes, and this is sort of the big change that we're looking at, significant change. For people who transition into this new plan, we're going to end the sick leave accrual part. We're simply going to, if the employee is sick and out on leave, and they're in this new plan, we're going to pay them for their sick leave. We're not going to worry about what their accrual is and whether they have the sick leave hours on the bank. We're going to pay them because we trust our employees and feel that they're not going to take advantage of us, but we want to keep them whole. This sort of came out of that committee in one of their suggestions, and I'll get to that in a second. We're going to continue to...
Is everybody still in their chairs? The first time they tried to sell this one to me, I about fell out of mine, so. But keep going, Sam.
It takes a minute. We're going to continue to track the hours of sick leave in our system and monitor that. And you'll see why in a second. And we're going to make sure that the employee who is out sick, that those benefits coordinate with basically the way our short-term disability policy works. So if an employee's out for longer than a week right now, we have an 8-day elimination period. They go on to short-term disability. In order to go on short-term disability, they have to bring in a note from their doctor, and it has to be approved, and it's approved through our vendor, and Lincoln. Same deal here. If they're out sick for longer than a week, we would expect that they'd apply for short-term disability, and for us to continue to pay out the sick leave, they would have to be approved to get short-term disability from the carrier. So there's our safeguard that somebody's not going to come in and say, oh, I'm sick for 3 weeks and want us to pay them the whole time. It also limits our liability with that coordination with the short-term disability, because short-term disability, if someone's out for a month, is going to pay 66% as long as they're out up to 6 months' time. Would only be liable for 33% of their pay during the time that they're on a short-term disability. So it caps our liability there as well. So that's why we wanted to coordinate it with the short term.
Is there any concern that if you're not accruing sick sick leave that, people may want to take short, obviously, like you say, a week or 8 days, they need
Right.
to have a doctor's, but.
And you'll see how we incentivize that in a second, but what we're looking at doing is a vacation buyback program for people in this plan too, in order to control that.
Let me address that as well with a different, because that's correct. But the flip side to that is when we're accruing vacation and sick, you might have a real healthy year, and the wrong mindset is thinking that, gosh, those are 40 hours of sick that I'm going to leave on the books.
I think I'll be sick.
I think I might want to be sick. Now, is that more of a, that would be less of a professional mindset that I would think would exist in most of our employees. If they're healthy, they're going to be here, which is kind of why I think we've got the type of staff and employee base that, you can get outside of the reality and the normal a little bit and try something like this, so long as we have some safeguards in place so that we cap our exposure. I actually think that the practical effect will be that we'll see less sick usage than we see when we see a number on paper and say, gosh, is that number going to go away, or do I need to make it go away?
Lance?
A lot of companies have kind of solved that problem. You just have PTO.
Right.
They don't differentiate between sick and time off. That you just have a lot of paid time off, and
That is true. A lot of companies are going to pay time off.
right.
I think that the way that I've seen a lot of companies transition is actually what they do is they add more sick time, or they add the sick time onto the vacation time. So it increases that bank.
Okay.
And that really didn't address sort of where we were on this. Because otherwise the employees feel like they're losing something. And that's the way that most places have gone. They've sort of increased that baseline number of vacation hours. And our plan's pretty rich right now. It would be tough to go that route. Sort of the why we did this, and we talked about it, or talked about a couple of these. We had that committee that formed to look at this issue, and they brought forward a few issues, several issues, and I think it addressed a lot of them. They were concerned about losing their sick leave. Right now there's a cap of 52 hours per year that you can carry over of sick leave. We don't accrue that much. Regular admin employees accrue 52 hours a year. Public safety accrues 75 plus, right around 75. The concern was that when you lose it at the beginning of the year, inevitably we have one employee who gets the flu the first week of January, and instead all they had was they might have had 90 hours the week before. We bump them down to 52 on the carryover. Now they're out for 40 hours and they lose all their sick leave and they have no reserve left on that. So we're trying to look at how we can address that issue. We had a catastrophic leave bank where employees could donate to the bank and they could directly donate to another employee. We did away with that during the last rule change because it's awfully hard to administer. And what would inevitably happen when employees donated it to somebody, whoever was sick at the end of each year was the person who got it donated to, and it ended up being 1,500 hours of sick leave that ended up in this one person's bank. And at the end of the year, they had to figure out somebody to donate those hours to. So it was sort of this rolling group of time. This, again, would address the loss of that catastrophic sick leave bank. It brings all the new employees under the new plan, and that was one of the things the committee felt that we sort of needed to draw the line in the sand and leave all of our current employees alone. And it increased they want to increase the number of hours banked annually on sick leave, which we do by saying it's kind of an unlimited bank. If you're sick, we're going to pay you for that time. It establishes that we trust our employees and that they're not going to abuse it. And the trade-off is it also allows for increased staffing by hopefully people not taking what you said, the 60 hours at the end of the year that they have to burn and just using it at the end of December. What we did in order to sort of incentivize our employees to not use sick leave and not to burn this is we wanted to set up a plan where at the end of each year, based on the previous fiscal year, employees could sell back up to 32 hours of vacation time annually. So if they don't, the way we set this up is qualifications were employees who have been here with the city for less than 5 years would be able to sell back 16 hours. Employees who have been with the city for more than 5 years can sell back 32 hours per year. In order to qualify for that, employees cannot use more than 24 hours of sick leave during the previous year. So we're, again, incentivizing them to keep that number low and their usage of sick leave low in order to receive this vacation buyback in December each year. Employees can always sell back hours that are in their vacation bank, so they can't use all their vacation hours too and hope to sell back 32. They'd have to at least have it in their bank in order to sell it back, and those hours would leave when they did sell it back. Again, we're very concerned about the possibility of abuse on this. Departments need to monitor their usage. Supervisors need to be aware of any problems and be ready to discipline employees if they're abusing the sick leave program. If they're out every month, and it's the same rule that it is today. If you have an employee who's sick every Monday following a Georgia home game, then it's an absenteeism issue. And the departments need to address it. We encourage them to do that. It's still the same issue. If somebody's abusing sick leave, the department still needs to act. I don't think that's going to change very much.
How do you
If
prove?
we have somebody that's absent on the Monday after maybe Notre Dame loses, we'll address that. Sorry, Sam.
It's okay. I'm not going to comment.
And do we offer psychological counseling?
It does bring up a question. How do you prove, how do you document abuse? Or how do you prove abuse? So they're off every Monday after, a tech game or something.
We don't have to
Again,
worry about
I
that
think
with tech. We're on
departments-
to higher expectations.
I think departments know the answer to that. They know when people are abusing the system. They know when that pattern's established. And I know the fire department actually has stricter rules in place on when they can use sick leave versus vacation leave too. So they're already limiting that liability, and that's 55 out of our 123 employees are under a stricter set of rules in sick leave use than the rest of our employees.
Bill, as you manage something, it becomes pretty apparent as a trend emerges, especially when, usually it's your gut that kicks in the first and says, I hadn't seen that person at work on a Friday in a couple of months. And then you start to track, what days folks are there. And I always like to track it and still do track it visually because you could color code a certain, I won't tell you what color I use, but you can color code a certain block and put it on a calendar. And, once you start to look at a couple of months, you can see if there's trends there. And, is there a definitive, gosh, if they take 5 consecutive Fridays off in a row that lead into a sunny weekend? Maybe not, but, maybe so. In each case is kind of on a case-by-case basis. So, and I think that probably is even as we start to discipline on attendance issues or move forward with other more strict things, it's probably going to be dealt with on a personnel case-by-case basis so that you don't put a one-size-fits-all rule in there, because then in order for it to be what it is, it has to be the one size. Yeah. So, I've been pretty successful at times in encouraging people either to come to work or to find other employment if they just didn't want to be. Obviously, they didn't want to be here. So,
If they needed too many mental health days.
Yeah, and also while I've got the microphone, just before Sam gets into the costs and what some of the cost savings are, he's referred a couple times to the work of this committee, and I want to bring you into the group of knowing what that committee was, because I don't want you to think that we just, when all else fails, form a committee and see where they want to go. We go with a topic. We formed this one almost as almost a beta test, almost a team. We were in the process of working through some of the concepts that go along with what you might or might not have heard as this, the high-performing organization model. And part of the high-performing organization model is to recognize that there are values and talents at all levels of the organization, and that occasionally you can tap into people that you don't hear from at all and see what their ideas are on a topic. And you form a venture team and you write a charter for them and kind of say, you guys need to stay in this box. I mean, I'll give you all the latitude you need in the world, and we're going to evaluate what you say, but you got to stay sort of in this box. And we put together a venture team to address this, the high vacation accrual. It consisted of one representative from the police department that the police department picked, as well as one representative from the police department that was at random drawn out of a hat. Same thing with the fire, one that fire picked versus one that was randomly drawn out of a hat. Same thing with the remainder of City Hall, one that was picked, one that was randomly drawn out of a hat. And it was those 6 people led by a department head who wasn't attached to this process, who was given this charter and the set of conditions and said, these are the problems we need fixed. So it wasn't that we put together 6 known entities who would have an interest in getting to a certain place with this. It was that we purposefully tried to reach into areas of the organization that we don't otherwise tap into to discover some of the talent that exists, to say, here's a real problem, see how you guys can fix it. So it was a little bit more than a committee, and it actually had some structure to it, and the results were pretty cool. Actually, we were able to use most of them. A couple of them I had to throw out just because we couldn't afford them, but good many of their recommendations we were able to incorporate. Go for it, Sam.
Thanks. For the final component of this, what does this vacation buyback component actually end up costing the city? And we looked at sort of the worst case or best case scenario where everybody opts into the new plan and is able to sell back their time next year. And that number is roughly $70,000 for this. But to be quite frank, there aren't going to be a whole lot of firemen who are going to opt into this. We're going to have those sort of outliers. But over time, and if we do get some people opt in, because it's going to be enticing to be able to sell, for them to be able to sell back some vacation time and get that check around the holidays. If we have 21 firefighters who do transfer, the savings in the manpower hours of what they're taking vacation-wise versus what they would be giving up offsets the cost. You can see that where the line crosses at $70,000. We have it's about $3,200 per employee savings on the fire side for every firefighter who transitions over, based on the number of hours, and that hours saved on vacation. That doesn't count what they receive back on actual staffing. If you pull the fire personnel, probably a more realistic number that we're looking at, and if everybody takes less than 24 hours of sick leave, you're looking at probably about a maximum of about $45,000 based on the number of people who qualify and the number of hours that would be paid out. Again, the potential issues, Again, the potential issues is managing the sick leave usage and how many public safety employees will come over. Again, there won't be a whole lot of fire. There'll probably be some police, not everybody. They'll want to keep their higher accruals. But that will be sort of where we are, and we'll be able to figure out a final number once we get a couple of months in and know who options into the new plan. The next step, we hope to bring this back forward again for consideration at your January 7th meeting after the first of the year. We'll then need to open a window and allow the employees who want to opt in to plan to allow them to opt in. Sick leave changes would go into effect at the end of that window period, so they'd lose their accruals and they'd have that open into sick leave. New hires, the plan will be in effect January the 1st of 2013. Anybody hired after that date would be under this new plan. And we'd anticipate paying the vacation buyback on the first non-payday Friday in December of 2013. Any questions I can answer about what our proposal and our thoughts are on this issue or these issues?
You have a gut feel or talk to, candidly to employees or personnel, get an idea of what the participation would be? Or?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a pretty no-brainer for the hourly and non-hourly employees that are more administrative. I think, like Sam indicated, you probably see about 50% of the police department swap. And I think you might see about 0% of the fire department swap over, and it'll just become almost more of a change moving forward. That benefit that they have at this point is a rich benefit. It's a non-sustainable benefit. It was a benefit that was in place just like it was in the police department. It's a deployment benefit. It's one of those that to be competitive on the front end. We made some decisions to offer vacation accrual, high levels of vacation accrual, to incentivize bringing experience to our very young department. We're competitive enough now in the marketplace that we can tailor it back to something that's more realistic.
And that includes the fire department as well. We're not at risk of driving talent away with this plan in the fire aspect.
I don't think so. We had great representation from the fire department on this venture team. I think the chief's here. He could probably speak to that unless he.
He's nodding his head.
Yeah.
New folks.
New folks, no. I've got a stack this high of applicants right now. Like Chris had mentioned, that the incentive early on in the department was to get quality folks, and that's what that benefit did. But as you mentioned earlier as well, that managing that is a nightmare. So this new plan will definitely allow us to continue to get quality folks. I think our department's risen to a level that this is a place to be. So I'm not concerned about that at all.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? Okay.
Now, just procedurally, so you all know how this happened this time. Remember, before this personnel policy was adopted by ordinance, we removed the ordinance requirement, and now the council will adopt the personnel policy by resolution. So what we've elected to do in this one is to bring it before you in a work session, and then we'll bring it forward during a council meeting on the 7th of January in resolution format. There's no longer the ordinance requirement.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, for our city clerk, please call the next item.
Next item is discussion of the Crabapple Livable Center Initiative, LCI. This is being presented by Michelle McIntosh Ross and Caleb Rasico from Tennell Spengler Walsh and Associates.
Yes, you should have a draft of the Crabapple LCI in front of you. This study we are submitting to the London Regional Commission for designation through their LCI grandfathering process. If you remember, during the Highway 9 LCI, the amazing thing about LCI designation is that it opens up doors for future funding. We met with ARC through this process, and all indications show that this document should meet all of the criteria and be accepted. I have Caleb Brasco over here. He's the senior principal with TSW who worked on the our award-winning Crabapple form-based code and TDR ordinance. He also put together the LCI document, and so he'll talk to you a little bit about it and answer any questions that you have before next week. Next week I'll be coming before you with a resolution to adopt this LCI as an amendment to the comprehensive plan. We went to the Planning Commission and they recommended approval, so I'll turn it over to Caleb.
Thanks, Michelle. Good evening, Council. As Michelle mentioned, when we were retained by the City of Milton to prepare the form-based code for Crabapple, one of the things that the city also asked us to look at was whether or not we felt that the Crabapple visioning study that was done in 2011 could be grandfathered into an LCI study. And so what we essentially did was we had a preliminary meeting with ARC and we said, okay, we've got this plan that was a very robust public process, and do you feel that it would be appropriate for LCI grandfathering? The real benefit to that, as Michelle mentioned, being that it makes the City of Milton eligible for additional federal funding. They said preliminarily yes, and so we went through an exercise where we basically took the visioning study, took all of the recommendations in it, all of the plans in it, all of the graphics in it, and repackaged it into the LCI document that you have before you. In addition, because the city and DOT and other entities had made a lot of progress in moving forward, we also coordinated with the various City of Milton departments to make sure that any of the most current transportation projects were reflected in it. Any of the other current county initiatives, for example, the new library, were reflected into it, and essentially packaged all of these ongoing city initiatives into this LCI document. At the end of that, we also prepared a few statutory requirements of the LCI program. The really most important, which is to take all of these various plans and to prepare an action matrix that talks about prices and funds and potential timelines. And then finally wrapped it all up with a statement talking about how the visioning process, by reference the Crabapple form-based code that had been adopted, and then very importantly, the whole exercise that it had gone through met the statutory requirements of the LCI. We submitted that a couple months ago to ARC. They told us that it looks good. They think that if the city approves it, they will certainly grandfather it as an LCI document. And so I'm here tonight to answer any questions that you may have on the document before you.
Okay. A couple, Bill. Oh, you want to
Give me a couple minutes.
Okay. Anybody else got a question? Bill, from Karen?
Assuming we approve this, what's the next step? It goes to the ARC. When would we hear something back from them, or when would we know what we're?
Well, they sort of had a slip up, and they actually have already sent the city of Milton a letter stating that it is acceptable for an LCI. They should have waited to do that, but it is approved in their mind. All they're waiting for is council to adopt it, and then it will be immediately grandfathered. So when the next call for funding comes out, if the city feels that they'd like to take advantage of that 80% federal funding for certain transportation projects, you can submit as part of that for Crabapple.
Okay, so would it be automatically, or would it, at that point in time, they would decide whether or not we were awarded and how much money we were awarded?
Well, the implementation funding would have to be competitive, so you would bid against other communities, and obviously would need to make sure your plans that you submit are competitive. But in terms of the LCI area being eligible, that's already a done deal. They're just waiting for council approval.
So next time funds are available, it would not take much for us to actually put something forward with dollar amounts, or would they decide the amounts of dollars?
No, you would actually be able to submit. You have up
request for a certain
request funds usually up to $4 million. We have actually tried to make this application as competitive as possible. So when you read through it, you'll notice there are a lot of things that Milton is already doing. Safe routes to school, the DOT Northwest Connector, a lot of the work that's already been done. But we wanted to put that in there because, again, I've done dozens of these, and ARC has reaffirmed that when you submit for funding, the more things you've done in this plan, even if they're ongoing, the much more competitive you are in being considered for the actual money.
Would it be the kind of situation that we would want to get Alpharetta to submit it with us, since they have a little island within the Crabapple? Would that help us?
Not really, no.
That
They
would
would
help?
actually have to adopt it as well to be a joint sponsor. So I would discourage that for this case.
Okay. Anybody next have any questions? We have one more minute, Bill.
Most of this stuff
Let's
is
go
not
ahead
new
and
stuff
adopt
to
it.
us. Most of the stuff is just
Yeah, none of it
together
should
the
be
stuff.
new, hopefully.
Okay. It's all just all pulled together in one spot.
Exactly, reformatted.
Okay.
And as Michelle mentioned, Planning Commission did give some very minor grammatical changes that we'll be making. And they also pointed out that the U.S. Census data about how many employees currently exist in Crabapple is extremely low. And so we know that there are more than 19 retail jobs in the Crabapple area, even though the U.S. Census says that based on the income tax filings, there are 19. So we're going to up that number based on the number of employees that Milton and the Old Blind Dog told us they have. So.
Okay, anybody else? No?
Looks good.
Okay, well, we
Nice report.
appreciate everything you've done, Caleb, and
Thank
being
you.
here tonight, and look forward to moving forward.
Great. Thank you.
Tell Jerry Spangler hello.
Will do.
Now, if you have little technical things you want to work with on that, you got a week to go through it. Our staff can answer questions on that without any problem. You just need, that's a way to get a plan, approved as an LCI plan with final all right, where, you know, that most of the time comes to
Right.
You can get the clip coupon or anything.
we get it worked out.
All right, we'll have our city clerk please call the next item on branding.
Final item is discussion of Milton branding and signage project. Mr. Jason Wright.
We're here again tonight with, this is the same presentation we deferred before because we had a 4-member council when it was slated to come forward before. We're slightly better than that tonight. We have a 5-member council. So I guess I want to ask you the question. What Jason was going to present was kind of where we've resulted is more or less gosh, we think we've captured the vision of what you all want for this brand.
Thank you, Michelle.
You want us to go forward with that tonight, or do you still feel passionate there needs to be the full complement here? I mean, give us some direction on what you want to do.
part of it, do we remember who was not here the last time? We had 4
We
people.
didn't make the presentation the last time. We
Okay.
just pushed it off. So
Okay.
nobody has seen anything. We just pushed it because, no,
No,
we
I
didn't.
thought we did, we got some
Yeah.
input,
We did see.
but I can't remember exactly who was here and who wasn't here.
I was here.
Okay. You were here, Bill. Were you here, Matt? I was here. Karen, were you here? You weren't here.
No, I think.
Karen was not, it
I
was.
think
Bert was.
Karen was not and Bert wasn't. I don't know
Yeah,
about
I think,
Joe.
Joe wasn't
Joe
either.
was not.
So we got, seemed like at
So you
least
have me in
We got at least
addition.
2 that weren't here last time. It's up to the council. I mean, something like this, I'd like to see everybody kind
I
of
think,
see at the same time and, give the feedback, but it's not
You want us
imperative.
to go
so-
forward and just make a quick presentation?
Yeah, why
You all
don't-
don't have to give us, if you don't feel
Why don't
comfortable
we
giving
do
us
that? 'Cause
direction
that's-
tonight, just.
That's healthy, but then maybe, save the call for, let everybody take a look at it.
Okay, so for those of you who've seen this, it's going to be the same thing. Basically, what I am presenting is, so this is where we were the last time for the 2 that were not here. And just so you know, Bert said he's okay with it as long as it doesn't have any filigree, whatever we decide.
Any what?
I didn't know
Filigree.
you
He
knew
didn't like
those
the
big words.
Filigree, you know, the,
No, he didn't like the
ornate.
little curly cues.
yeah.
Little foo-foo stuff.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Shrink the horse, make Milton much larger, get rid of the Georgia at the bottom, bring back multiple shades of brown to see how they look. This first one, these are light browns. Actually, this top one is the one that I like the most. That's Pantone 730, which is our current logo color. That's the color of the horse in our current logo. It's also the color of the city seal. I like it because I think that it's got enough orange in it that it really pops. Then we just move through the shades of brown. We have the lightest, a little bit darker underneath that. These are mid-tone browns. And then we've got the final to where you get so dark it's almost a black. And like I said, I made the Milton much larger, shrunk the horse down, got rid of the Georgia down there.
And the horse has 4 legs, right?
Yes, it does.
With ears, too.
I like the Pantone 730 better.
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean-
the darkest browns you can't see.
Absolutely.
The difference between brown and blacks.
And of course, one of the nice things about doing this in-house is that we don't have to be, it's not super precious. Depending on the project, if it
Right,
needs
you
to
can
be
just-
modified slightly, it can be. And we don't have to go to anybody and get charged for anything like that. We own all the files. We own every bit of this. So we can change it on the fly if we feel like it.
I have a comment, going from the first with the Georgia on there, and I can agree with, taking the Georgia off because it was so big. The only concern I have with this, I'm wondering if we ought to have a small Georgia in there somewhere because there is several other Miltons.
There
I
is,
understand.
There's
Home of the
Florida, there's up north.
Home of the best quality of life in Georgia is on the top.
Oh, you know?
yeah,
Okay,
right.
good point.
So,
Well, I didn't catch that.
yeah. I was just,
Reading that separately, so, okay. Bill?
One point I had, and I sent you a note
Yeah,
last
absolutely.
week, established, I think it should just be like you have on the front sheet, established 2006.
Okay. So not December 1st, 2006.
I
You just
think-
like
I think-
established December.
less is
or
more.
established
Yeah,
2006.
yeah, I agree with that.
That's not a problem. So, I guess the next step would be if you guys feel comfortable with it, and I can go ahead and send it out in an email,
Yeah.
and then we could just move forward with a resolution because I know we have the money for signage and stuff like that. We want to move ahead with that, and I'd like to really launch it at the beginning of the new year because then leading up to the new year, I can redo our letterhead, I can redo our business cards and stuff like that, and then as we just need new business cards and everything, we'll just move forward with this logo.
Okay, everybody okay with that?
Yeah, good job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason, good process, working
Okay.
through that.
Great. And while I got everybody here too, with the new year, would everybody mind looking at their bios? Especially, if you're new to council, your bio is going to be fine. But if what's that?
Blood pressure?
Well, but if your children's ages are listed in there, maybe if they've had a life event, they got married or they graduated college, something like that, the bio might be old. So if everybody would take a look at their bio and just make sure that everything's
You
good.
got a new cat, don't you, Joe?
I do.
can add the new cat to the bio.
New cat on there.
A new dog.
All right.
All right. Well,
Put
thank
the
you very
church
much
somewhere
for your
on top.
time. I appreciate
Thank
all
you,
your guidance
Jason.
on this. Thank you.
Okay.
And actually, I appreciate the freedom to be able to do this. Thank you very much.
And Jason, I don't know if you got a couple seconds, maybe while we're here, just discuss Saturday. I think it's coming together pretty well for our first annual council and hosted holiday event for our citizens. I know we've got some responses, which you've sent some more notices, so I'm sure we'll get some more too. But
Absolutely. We just sent out the reminder today. So we have RSVP'd about 150 people. And Mayor Lockwood has said that based on the numbers that he has had at his prior Christmas parties, that we can expect another 200, maybe more. So we think 350 to 400 is a good
maybe
number.
mixed with the people that are. And the other thing, I get a lot of people say they've seen it, they just haven't RSVP'd yet.
Absolutely.
So
I mean,
we'll have a feel.
We'll get RSVPs up to about 4 o'clock on Saturday.
Well, and the important thing, it's not like we're going to be checking really for the invites that you get back when you RSVP. That was just another step to try and, show people that we were serious, so that they did have to take that extra step. But we do have a 55-person bus that will be running from Milton High School to the mayor's home for the 4 hours. It'll get there at about 3:45 and last until 8. We have pretty much an instant party from It's My Party Rentals, so we'll have a 30 by 45 tent, lights, heaters, 15 tabletops, 8 serving tables, linens, chiller tables, coolers, serving for 300.
Coolers and heaters.
Yeah. Yeah. Just in case it's cold, because that would be our luck. It's been so mild that, that it would just drop and everything.
Got it covered.
And
We've got some restaurants, so I've got a few more that I've talked to besides the ones that they've got confirmed we're going to give them a table and they can set up and serve and kind of promote their business, almost like a miniature taste of Alpharetta. That seems to.
yeah, we've so far we've got confirmed El Azteca, Brooklyn Joe's, Vintage Pizzeria, Scottsdale Farms, and Old Blind Dog.
I know,
And then Ippolito's
Sedgwick
as well.
with the union's going to do it, and I call it Ippolito's wants to do a table too. So
I got a
We
question
should have
too.
good food.
As a council, do you want us to park at the house?
I was going to address that. Yeah, I would. A couple things. You guys certainly, and we'll tell them. At the front, obviously, let council. We've got some other elected officials I've called that may want to come that serve Milton District. Let them, and we'll come up with some kind of passcode or something, or a list for folks. And I'll probably call you guys, some of y'all, later this week if you can help me do some things. And also, it's going to just invite council afterward, after 8 o'clock. The bus will quit running, so most people will be gone. But if you want to hang out and continue on, just a little more casual if we want to.
Clean up.
Yeah, clean up.
Well, that is actually one good thing with It's My Party Rentals. We do have the trash, and they will do the trash service. So they'll come pick everything up.
Do
So you won't have to do any dishes.
Do you cook?
Do I cook? I cook at home, but not
Well,
for,
see, bring a Jason.
So what do we need to do besides bring some dessert for 100 people, and do we need some beer or wine?
We do need, because I think I
Obviously,
may
the
have
city doesn't
some.
need to be
I
buying
think,
that.
I think I have some donated. I know Foster Sip said he could sell some at discounted, and Costco. So that's why I say maybe we can chat later in the week and throw in a little pile. But
Absolutely, and we've got since everyone donated the $500, we had $3,500. Looks like we'll be able to throw the party and get the bus for about $3,000. So then the rest of the money, whatever's left over, I'm going to go to Costco on Friday and buy soda and water. So we've got those. And then, you guys will need to figure out the beer and wine because, as we
we'll keep that
discussed,
separate,
we don't
yeah.
want city anywhere near that.
I do have a bunch of big coolers, if we need coolers to put like beer and soft drinks in.
We'll have 4 that can hold 120 each, plus 2
temporary permit for
fill and
someone
chill tables, which I guess are like high top
permit
tables that
or
can
have
hold
someone
ice
that, like a
and
bartender
beer
or
and
somebody
stuff.
that's got a lot
And
of
we will
alcohol
have
there.
wine glasses
So
for
that's what I'm trying to
$300.
Okay, good. Looks like we're
But
good
everything
set.
else, if we could stick to, obviously,
bottles and cans and stuff. Like I'm not going to get 2 liters of soda. I'm going to get cans, and I'll buy ice as well. I'll buy a bunch of ice just to in case it doesn't come with the.
The other thing you might want to keep, if you got any friends that are offered to help or something that just want to show up at, before 4 o'clock and just hang out and help, because I've got several and they've offered, so we're taking them up on it, because I didn't really want to get to where we ask any of our people that volunteer for the city a whole lot to do, because it's like, don't want to ask them to have to do something, just come and enjoy themselves. So if you have anybody that, says, hey, we'll be glad to help out, say, come on, and, let them go around and keep the coolers iced down or scoop the food up or, whatever, so. Chris?
And just please be mindful of a quorum. Whether that's to set up, whether that's at the party, whether that's afterwards. I believe that the city attorney would say there probably can be a quorum present now with the new open meetings law, but the perception becomes reality. And I don't need to be the one to tell you all that. You know it, but just be mindful of that.
And maybe
I've heard some chatter.
Yeah, maybe Ken, if you can address that, because from my interpretation, it's obviously a event that's been publicized, but also we don't want to be in a quorum sitting in a corner and talking amongst ourselves, even if we're talking about a football game or something. We want to all be kind of spread out, and if we are together, be around the public that obviously can hear everything we say. Is that
right? Yeah, the new open meetings act was really generous on this point, and specifically carved out an exception that says that a meeting does not constitute a social, civic, or religious or those sorts of events. So obviously it anticipates those are going to be events, just like this one. And so to the city manager's point, the only caveat I would give you is just be mindful of perception and show just a little bit of practical attention to how it may appear. That's all. You're totally fine and well within the boundaries of the law to be there.
Sure.
So there's only one football game that really matters we can talk about?
What might that be?
All right.
I guess the media's going to be invited.
Everybody's been invited, yeah. I have to check on the RSVP to see if they actually RSVP'd or not. They have, okay.
It was line of security.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Make them wear badges.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I'll close the meeting, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Just don't give a cop.